no one's asking why. The world keeps spinning, no one seems to care. Lost in the noise, a silent prayer. Does anyone out there even hear the cry? I'm just a voice in the wind, but I'll keep on screaming, 'cause someone's missing. I won't stop dreaming.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining today. So we're going to go over Michael Politte and his wrongful conviction. Michael Politte was 14 years old when he got arrested for the murder of his mother. Um, the reason I'm bringing this up today is because tomorrow I actually have an interview with the one juror that has held guilt this whole time and feeling that she made the wrong decision, the one holdout juror. So before tomorrow's interview with her, I kind of want to get you guys familiarized with Michael Politte and the murder of his mother, Rita Politte. Um, so that tomorrow you're not like totally confused on who this woman is that I'll be speaking with. But I give this lady so much respect. She was the holdout juror that didn't like, she always felt that it was just the wrong decision and he wasn't guilty. But after so long of being in there with the other jurors, she kind of just went along with it. Like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Well, throughout all these years, she also has helped with him being free. And so he is out of prison after 23 years. But is he really free? Because although he's out of prison, he still has life with parole, which means as a construction foreman to travel, he still has a parole officer. He has to ask permission to leave every time he wants to leave state. Now, if you are found innocent, why is he still on parole? And why is Missouri so hard headed that we still are making him have a parole officer for the rest of his life? So I want you guys to get a little bit more familiar with the Michael Politte case and his mother, Rita Politte, of course, the victim in all of this, the main one. So I'm going to go ahead and start like a podcast, and I have a few videos. I'll try to keep it as short as I can. I know I haven't been doing lives lately. I've had a lot going on, but I just want you guys to kind of familiarize yourself with the case so that tomorrow when the juror does come forward, she doesn't have to relive all of this over and over. Because I was going to do this all tomorrow, but the more I think about it, I really don't want to put that on her. Like, she's just went through too much already. So I'll go ahead and share the other and we'll go from there. Okay, give me just a minute. Something's not wanting to work. Imagine that, right?
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And they played this as if they were trying to convince me that I did something.
Let's be straight about the divorce stress test. It's pseudoscience.
I didn't murder my mother.
Somebody planted this evidence, yet no one followed up on that lead.
And I asked him, I said, what the hell is he doing in jail? Oh, well, we don't have anybody else.
Welcome to this special edition of St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fensky. We invite you to join us for the next hour as we dig into the details of a murder case from 23 years ago. The story has new relevance today. Next week, lawyers plan to file an appeal with the Missouri Supreme Court on behalf of a man named Michael Politte. They have spent more than a decade painstakingly building the case that he is not guilty of the crime that sent him to prison 22 years ago as a teenager, the brutal murder of his own mother.
I feel like in a lot of ways they disregarded a lot of evidence, like my mother's fingernails. They never tested a rape kit. Why would you not test a rape kit of a woman who's just murdered?
And they offered you a plea bargain.
They did offer me a plea bargain. They offered me 15 years for voluntary manslaughter.
And that would have included time served.
Time served. I would have been home probably in 2008. I'd have been home about 12 years ago.
Were you tempted at the time to
No.
take that?
No.
Looking back on it now,
No.
is there a part of you? No part of you.
Nope.
I mean, you would have been out in 2008.
No, I'll die in here. I didn't murder my mother, and she's going to get her justice.
Thousands of Missouri prisoners claim to be innocent, but few receive the backing of not only the Midwest Innocence Project, but also the Roderick and Solange MacArthur Justice Center as they advance their claims.
We're talking about a 14-year-old kid who found his mother's body burning on the floor of her bedroom. And from the moment police arrived at the scene was suspect number one. They never looked at other suspects in a meaningful way because they misjudged him from the second they encountered him. They thought he's not acting the way I think someone should react when their mother dies. And because of that, he was taken into custody that day, relentlessly interrogated for 48 hours, and he never left.
Megan Crane is the co-director of the Missouri chapter of the MacArthur Justice Center. Mike's case is the first her team took on after they started representing people they believed had been wrongfully convicted. Megan explains why Mike Politte's case captured the office's attention and its resources.
Mike's family is the victim's family. So they have staunchly believed he is innocent from day one. So it's the rare case where the victim and our client's family are one and the same, and then no one remains or ever existed connected to the victim and the victim's family who believed Michael was guilty or that he should be behind bars.
Mike's first meeting with the Innocence Project was 12 years ago, but it was only this summer that his attorneys filed a petition with the Missouri Court of Appeals Western District. Megan says the delay was because it's a tough battle to overturn a conviction already in place.
In a case like Mike's, it shouldn't be that hard. We have the evidence with scientific certainty now that the only physical evidence at Mike's trial was false. That was the centerpiece of the state's case. It was the state's only physical evidence. Without it, their case entirely falls apart. So it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't take this long. And in other states, it doesn't. But in Missouri, it does. And part of why it took that long for our team to work up the case is that we know the Herculean hurdles we're up against in the Missouri court system. And so we are going to put in the time it takes to put together as rock solid a case as we possibly can. We've had for years this key scientific evidence, but we wanted to do the legwork to gather all of the other pieces we possibly could before we went into court.
Today, you'll hear about some of those pieces. You'll hear from one of the nation's top experts in chemical analysis who confirms what Megan previously alluded to, that the only physical evidence tying Mike to his mother's death has been thoroughly and completely debunked. It wasn't just bad science, but it had been proven to be bad by the time of Mike's trial. You'll also hear from a veteran homicide detective who reviewed the case file and says the Washington County Sheriff's Department made serious errors in its investigation. And you'll hear from Mike himself. We sat down together at the Jefferson City Correctional Center for nearly an hour. He put nothing off limits.
While we're doing this, I want to bring up, for those of you that aren't aware, this Washington County, Missouri is also where Donna I. was found deceased. Christian Hildebrandt, they first said that his death was suicide, even though he was stabbed twice. They said he did that. Fingerprints were wiped, but they said that. This is the same Washington County where Michaela Jones was found in the woods. This is the same Washington County of little small town corruption, and there's several videos out there. I mean, do your homework. This is the same Washington County. But the worst part about this was a young 14-year-old boy that had a friend over. It's just a little small, tiny country town where everyone knows everyone, everyone. And his main thing that he did with his buddies were, they had a little store and they would go down to this tiny store right down from their home, and they would play pool. They, hang out with their buddies. They'd ride bicycles all through there all day long. In the summer, you'd see kids everywhere just riding bicycles. So just kind of picture that as she's speaking, because this is an average 14-year-old child going through all of this.
You won't hear from the prosecuting attorney who sent Mike to prison. He ignored our request for comment. And you won't hear from the prosecuting attorney in Washington County, Missouri today. He chose not to give a statement defending this prosecution. Yet Mike, now 37, remains in prison. And if Megan and her fellow attorneys are correct, it doesn't just mean that the state of Missouri wrongfully convicted a grieving teenager and sent him to prison for life without chance of parole. It also means someone else got away with murder. On the night of December 4th, 1998, Rita Politte went out to a bar with her friends. Rita was a newly divorced mom living in Hopewell, Missouri, a rural area about an hour and a half west of St. Louis in Washington County. She came home around 11 p.m. with sandwiches for her 14-year-old son, Mike, who then went by the nickname Bernie. They were joined by Mike's friend, Josh Sansui, who was sleeping over. The two teens ate the sandwiches while Rita checked her answering machine. Then she said she was going to bed. Not long after, the two boys did the same. It was a normal evening in every way. The two boys slept in Mike's room, but both Mike and Josh have said they woke up early the next morning, just after 6. Mike says both immediately noticed the smell of smoke.
And it was a light haze. It wasn't real thick in my room. It was just like a light haze. It reminded me of when my mom had burnt bacon. She fell asleep. She started cooking breakfast. She burnt bacon. The way my room was filled with smoke, it reminded me of that. But I asked Josh if he was smoking a cigarette, and he said no. And I threw the blankets off of me, and I went to my door, and I opened my door, and there was a wall of smoke, and it was white. And when I opened my door, there was a smoke detector 5 feet from my door, and I could barely hear it.
It was going off.
It was going off.
But just the smoke was so
thick
and heavy.
It was so thick up top, about mid to up top. It was thinner at the bottom, but it was and the where the smoke detector was positioned was at the very top of the wall near the ceiling in the dining room area, which is about 5 feet, 6 feet away from my bedroom door.
So at this point, something's really wrong.
My house
What did
is
you
on
do?
fire.
Yeah, your house is on fire. What do you do at that point?
Well, we ran out. Josh was behind me. As we're running through the corridor from my bedroom, I have a straight visual shot at my mom's bedroom, and I could see an orange glow near her door or just inside of her door. And Josh, I believe, said call the fire department. By the time we get to the foyer area, I see my mother's truck. And I told Josh, my mom's still here. Josh went past me, and he went out of the house. And I stayed at that area between the foyer and the living room, and I called out to my mother 3 or 4 times. I didn't get an answer. At that time, I tried to run towards her room, and I was standing up, so my eyes were burning. I was starting to choke, and I turned back. I ran outside, catch my breath, and I seen a yellow water hose. And as I'm grabbing the water hose, I see Josh coming from the left side. I asked him to turn the water on, and I grabbed the hose, and I run as fast and hard as I can through the living room. And when the slack gave out, I dropped down to my knees to see what I could see. And I seen my mother's legs. I seen blood. And I seen fire from her, essentially her waist up. And I don't know how long I was there. I turned the water hose because it was a brass nozzle, one that you turn, and it sprays wide. And the more you turn it, the narrower the stream gets. I turned the water hose on, and I had it pointed towards the fire until I ran. And I ran out the house. I ran out the front door. I seen Josh near my neighbor's house that lived ahead of us. And I ran to him. And my cousin Leanne Skiles was hanging out at her door. And I said, my mom's dead. Somebody killed her, or something to the effect of, I'm going to get the motherfucker that did this. And she ran back in her house, and me and Josh ran back down to my house. And the next thing I seen Josh, he was tapping on my window, my bedroom window, as I'm standing outside the house. He's tapping on my window, and I look over, and he's pointing down at a little marijuana plant I had in a fishbowl. And I motioned for him to get out of the house. And he ran out of the house, and he ran beside the house. And that was the last time that I actually remember seeing Josh. The next things I remember, I can't remember specifically what order they happened, but I remember talking to both my sisters from the behind in the back of a patrol car. I remember being in like an ambulance or a fire truck or something, and an EMT lady was shining a light in my eyes, and she was looking down my throat, see, I guess, how much smoke I've inhaled or whatever.
Now, as we listen to this, I know you guys are probably picturing it in your head as I am, but you know, it's so sad because even to hear him talk like this, it's, think back to when you were 14 years old and what would you do? I mean, how do you actually react? Because they've stated that he didn't have enough emotion. What exactly do you do in a situation where you're 14 years old and you see what he just described? What kind of emotion do they want? I mean, this is a child and he woke up to this. So not only are you 14 and you're waking up to this crazy, traumatic, everything's horrible. This is like a nightmare. A part of him had to think, is this even real? I mean, you're just waking up. This is horrible. This is traumatic. This right here, if there is a frozen shock phase, this right here has to be it. I mean, you're a child of all things. And of course, his friend and a lot of people have pointed fingers, and I'm not doing that today. I'm not going to point fingers. I'm not going to say any of that. I'm not the judge. I'm not the jury. I'm not law enforcement. I'm just a YouTuber trying to get a story out. So at the same time, my heart just goes out to this whole family because this child didn't show enough emotion. Wow, he did it. That is some crazy logic for law enforcement to immediately assume. And this is only the iceberg of it, really. But as you listen to the rest of this, please keep in mind that he is 14 years old. Both these boys are young. They're very young. And his buddy, of course, yeah, oh my goodness, hey, there's a pot plant in here. I could see that. They're children. They're teenagers. And if any of you can say you didn't do it, then you're better than me because at 14 I did. So again, just as you hear this, keep in mind that right now he is free from prison. He has been released.
This sounds like it was just a lot of chaos, and it sounds like you were almost in a state of shock.
I was in shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, it sounds like you understood that your mom was dead. This was something that you got right away, but everything around it sounds like it's just.
There was a lot of chaos. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of movement. And people, I remember seeing my two sisters. I remember seeing my Aunt Patsy. They were reaching for me through the window of a patrol car. And they were reaching for me, and I was trying to grab their hand.
So you were there in a patrol car. When did you realize that they were acting like you were a suspect?
I don't think I realized that they were treating me like a suspect until they were actually interrogating me.
And was that pretty soon after? That was part of that same day? I mean, there was no going to bed between the fire and when they started interrogating you.
When Kirk Davis drove me from the scene to the sheriff's department, I asked him if he was going to be able to find out what had happened to my mom. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, if her throat was cut or something, would you be able to tell that? Are you going to be able to find out what happened to my mom? And they used that against me as me trying to interpret whether or not they're going to be able to find out what I did. And that's how they used that against me. And it was an innocent question. Are you going to be able to find out what happened to my mom? And they used it against me. Looking back on it, at that moment, they were considering me as a suspect, right? But I didn't realize that they were considering me a suspect until after I wrote a written statement about the events of the 4th and the 5th. They gave me a CVSA test, or a stress voice test. I answered all their questions. They asked me, did I murder my mother? I said no. Do you know anybody that would want to murder your mother? I said no. They told me I was lying. They would ask me again, go over the details of what happened. And I would relay the same set of facts and the same set of circumstances. Okay, Bernie, now tell us what really happened. And again, I would relay the same set of facts. And at one point, I think as I was in the county jail, I actually counted these. I think it was 26 consistencies amongst me and Josh's statements.
And they even tried to tell you at one point that Josh had turned on you, right?
Yeah.
They lied and said that Josh had said you did it.
Yeah, they said that. It was a tactic they used. They would put their badge at the edge of the desk in front of me. At one point, they asked for my shoes during the interrogation, and they took them outside the room. He said, "The shoes are evidence." I'm like, "Evidence of what?" Well, evidence that you murdered your mother. I didn't murder my mother. And they played this. It's almost as if they were trying to convince me that I did something. All right, that's what it felt like, because every time I would get to the point where I would say I woke up, I seen smoke. No, Bernie, no, go back. Like they wanted me to fill in a gap for them, and it was like they were trying to convince me that there was a gap there,
And they kept coming at you. I mean, they came at you for about 48 hours.
As you notice, he did say Bernie. That is his nickname. That's what all of his buddies called him. That was his sister's nickname for him. I mean, everyone around this little town, very, very tiny, tiny town, mainly fields, farmers, stuff like that. They called him Bernie. I mean, that was his nickname. All growing up, that was his nickname, Bernie. So when he says Bernie, it's not because of this situation. And I know how ironic that sounds, all of this, but that they've always called him that. So there is a YouTuber out there that tried to bring that point up because his middle name being Bernie. No, that's his nickname, and it has nothing to do with this crime. Just wanted to lay that out there.
And you mentioned this voice stress analysis test. They said you exhibited significant levels of stress. I mean, looking back at that, you got to think you had a number of reasons to be stressed out at that point.
Well, I just found my mother burning to death on the floor at 14 years old. To the best of my knowledge, there's not no literature or how-to manuals how to handle that. But apparently the Washington County Sheriff's Department has one. I've yet to read it, right? But it's their opinion that I acted strange or acted funny. Sheriff Ron Skiles, he said that I didn't act the way that he acted when his mom passed. I'm sorry that he lost his mom, because I know what that's like. But I would like to know the circumstances of which he lost his mom.
So they ended up arresting you and pretty quickly.
They arrested me December 7th, 1998.
So this is basically 48 hours later.
Mm-hmm.
You begged the officers to take your fingerprints.
I did.
Because you said somebody was trying to frame you for something you didn't do.
I did.
You felt like if they could just look at your fingerprints and compare that to what was there, that you'd be exonerated.
I offered everything. I cooperated with them to the point where they just didn't want my cooperation anymore. As a matter of fact, when they wanted to re-exhume my mother because they had failed or forgot to take her fingernails, my attorney at the time, Wayne Williams, looked at me at this court proceeding and said, "Bernie, we can object to this." I said, "Don't." because I'm trying to give them evidence to exonerate me.
And so what would be under her fingernails might be DNA from the person who killed her.
Exactly.
You're looking at this like a chance to get to the bottom of this.
Yes. Justice for Rita.
Rita's funeral was the day after Mike was arrested. He attended the service in an orange jumpsuit with feet chained.
I was in leg irons, and it was very emotional. It was very. I think even then I knew that she was the only person that would have helped me in this situation. And I knew I was going to win.
Mike has never changed his story about what happened that morning. Neither has Josh. That's even though the boys haven't seen each other since that day. And that's even though law enforcement charged Josh with a pair of unrelated crimes in a bid to get him to cooperate in the case against Mike. Josh didn't waver. At his trial, prosecutors claimed Mike had once, briefly, confessed. They pointed to a day 1 month after his mother's murder when Mike made a suicide attempt while in custody. They claimed that he said, quote, "I have not cared since December 5th. That's when I killed my mom." Mike has always insisted that is not actually what he said.
The day I tried to kill myself, I was overwhelmed. Right, I was done. I had enough. It felt like this was the only way out. And at that time, I tried to tie a sheet to the vent as I'm sitting on the toilet. I got it tied around the vent, and I'm tying it around my neck. And just as I get it tied around my neck, they all rush into my cell. They set me on the bed, and they was like, "Man, what's going on? Why are you trying to kill yourself?" I said, "I haven't cared. I haven't cared since they killed my mom." And it's really frustrating when law enforcement is there to uphold the law and protect us, really. And courts understand that, and they give their word, I think, at times more credit than what it deserves. Because a law enforcement officer or person, by my case and my experience, can say, "He confessed. We heard it. This is what he said." With no.
I want to say too that as these people have said this, there was one person that said she heard him say that. Well, then she came back out and took that statement back and said maybe she had misunderstood, but only after his conviction.
No recording, no signature, no laid out detailed events of the crime. Just, he said he did it. And that's upheld in the court of law in Missouri.
Prosecutors offered Mike a deal, plead guilty, and he'd do just 15 years in prison. He'd already spent nearly 4 years in jail waiting for trial. If he took the plea, he'd be out in less than a decade. He turned down the deal. He said he wouldn't plead guilty to something he didn't do. When we come back from the break, we'll look at what happened at Mike's trial. His part of the case in less than half a day. The jury found Mike guilty of second-degree murder. 4 months later, in April of 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison without the chance for parole. Such sentences have since been found unconstitutional for juveniles. The Supreme Court ruled that kids' brains are immature. They don't fully understand the consequences of their actions, and they deserve a chance to change. But that wasn't the case in 2002. Mike was 18 years old when he arrived at the Fulton Reception and Diagnostic Center. That's a maximum security prison in Callaway County. In prison in Jefferson City, Mike recalls that moment.
Well, it took time to adapt because there's a certain way you're supposed to carry yourself, and there's a certain way that you're supposed to move in prison, and it takes a while to fully grasp what those strings and what those moves are. right? Because you're always being watched. You're so confined that especially being so young, everybody's got their eyes on you, and including predators. There's a lot of sexual predators in prison, and that's in part what I was fighting for. So it takes a lot of mental strength to adapt at that young of age to this kind of life with these kind of people.
And were you thinking at this point, I'm innocent. Somebody's going to figure out a mistake has been made. I'm going to get out of here.
The only thing that, and this is what's unique about the situation, is that I was still relying on my father, even though I had my thoughts about his possible involvement, but I was still reliant on my father to try to help me. I guess the family did make him hire a lawyer after I was convicted, and it was Margulis out of Clayton, Missouri, and they did my direct appeal. And he informed me that and assured me that he hired the same lawyers to file my 2915 to further my appeals. And roughly a year and a half goes by, and I'm not hearing anything from any lawyers. They don't accept my calls. So I had a friend email Arthur Margulis from Margulis Law Firm and asked them where my case was at, and they wouldn't respond. And finally, I had that friend, say, "Hey, listen, if you don't answer, if you don't give us some kind of explanation what's going on, we're going to contact the Missouri Bar."
Okay, before we go anywhere else with this, I want to say that everything said here is allegedly. This is in his opinion. I'm like I said earlier, I'm just putting the story out here. A lot of fingers are being pointed at people. I can refer you to MTV did a I forget exactly what it's called, but MTV did this series on this, and it was on TV. It's also on 48 Hours. So with what he's saying right now, there is an interview with his dad through this. It's either 48 Hours or the MTV thing, but there is an interview with the father, and I would recommend you guys look at that. That is it's eye-opening. There's a lot about this case on that we won't discuss today, only because that's all allegedly and nothing's been proven yet. So I don't want to mess anything up in this investigation if they do reopen this, and I really hope that they do, and that Rita Politte gets the justice she deserves. But before we continue, I do need to say that everything here is stated allegedly and in my opinion, and it's for entertainment purposes only, even though this is very, very serious and this is heartbreaking. But this needs to be known.
And they shot a letter to me and pretty much told me that they don't represent me and they haven't represented me since my direct appeal. And that was the end of my relationship with my father.
And so that had to have been even beyond the betrayal from your father, which is a horrible thing in and of itself. The idea that you lost out on getting to do this appeal because you didn't realize it wasn't already underway. How did you even deal with that knowledge?
You really want to know how I dealt with it?
I do.
Heroin.
And you could get that in prison.
You get that in prison. Yeah.
Did that mess you up?
It did, but in a way, it clarified things for me. Right? Like it put me so far on rock bottom that when I was done, and it came from. I wrote a letter to Renee Murphy, my very first public defender. I wrote her and I asked her for help. I told her the situation, and she wrote me back pretty immediately. And she said that she doesn't do post-conviction litigation, but she gave me a sheet that had a bunch of Innocence Project websites on it. And within 4 months, a gentleman named Kim Blucker and about 6 law students come down to visit me.
And this was finally a group of people that were willing to hear what you'd been saying.
It was my chance.
What was that moment like?
It was nerve-wracking because this is my chance.
Yeah, I mean, what if they didn't believe you at that point?
This is my opportunity right here, and I left that visit and I paced myself for 4 days. I wore a hole in the floor, right? And I'm reliving everything that I told him, and I'm reliving the expressions that I'm seeing as I'm telling my story, and they were just disgusted. They were just in awe, and they were just, you could see in the faces of how did this happen? And from that moment on, I knew that I had help, and I knew that they were going to get me out of here.
Mike says that after that day, he never took heroin again, and the Midwest Innocence Project did take Mike's case. Even though Mike was just 14 when his mother died, he was tried as an adult and given an adult sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Megan Crane is the co-director of the MacArthur Justice Center's Missouri office, which joined the Midwest Innocence Project on the case last year.
I strongly maintain that the reasons Mike was initially suspected and the reasons he was convicted have everything to do with his youth. He had a public defender who didn't have the time, didn't have the resources, but also was ill-equipped to know how to relate to and represent an adolescent client. And Mike was unable to be an effective advocate for himself at that time. He didn't understand the system. He didn't understand his rights. And that played into why he ended up in that trial in the first place. He didn't know what was at stake when he was interacting with law enforcement.
So what went through your mind the first time you were able to read the transcript of what actually went down in this trial all those years ago?
I think two things struck me most prominently. How thin the state's case was from the get-go, even when they had this alleged physical evidence tying him to the crime. It was still circumstantial evidence, and that's really all they had. There's this theme of him being a cold, remorseless killer because of his lack of emotion or affect at the scene when he's a traumatized kid who just saw what he saw. That's essentially their entire case. That and the fact that Mike essentially did not receive a defense. His defense attorney put on 3 witnesses. Much less than a day of the trial was dedicated to his defense. And his defense attorney didn't consult with a single expert, even though the heart of this case was scientific evidence that he had no experience with and no knowledge of.
Less than a day. They sent him away for life as a kid after less than a day of evidence in his defense.
That's right.
So you've mentioned the physical evidence they have here is the shoes, and that the shoes allegedly had gasoline on them. How important was that to the state's case? Could they have won this conviction without that, what we now know, false evidence?
No. I would argue this case may have never even been brought to trial without that evidence. They had no physical evidence, any direct evidence, any even other circumstantial evidence other than that gasoline.
John Lentini dug into that alleged evidence from Mike's shoes on behalf of his attorneys. John is a forensics expert and a past chairman of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Criminalistics Section. He wrote the book on fire analysis in criminal cases. Literally, it's called Scientific Protocols for Fire Investigation. John Lentini says there was no gasoline on Mike's shoes. Shoes come with a variety of chemicals on them, particularly tennis shoes. For 25 years, investigators have known that shoes are, quote, problematic evidence in arson cases. Scientists discovered this problem in 1996, 2 years before Rita Politte was killed. But John tells me those findings didn't get much publicity until years later.
There's a chemist by the name of Cheryl Cherry, and she presented a paper called Arsonist Shoes, Clue or Confusion, ? And I saw this when I was attending the meeting in Nashville in 1996. And so we did a paper called The Petroleum Laced Background, which was published in 2000. So in 1998, if you didn't go to the Nashville meeting, or read the abstracts, you would not know that shoes were so problematic.
Okay, so now I'm looking at the timeline of this case. The trial was actually in 2002. If the prosecutors were paying attention, should they have known by then that this was a problem?
Prosecutors don't pay attention to scientific papers. The chemist who did the analysis should have been paying attention. But even so, 2 years is not a very long time in the greater scheme of things. It takes a while for advances in science to percolate through the community so that people get the idea that maybe we need to be careful with shoes.
Today, we have tools that distinguish things that look like gasoline from real gasoline. In this case, the chemists for the state didn't take those steps. They found, quote, aromatic solvent, not gasoline. Even so, John Lentini says he would not be surprised to learn that someone is still in prison because of this type of air.
There's lots of people in prison for crimes that they didn't commit or crimes that never even happened.
But looking at this, if this was the only physical evidence, was this kind of testimony, that would indicate to you a big problem.
Yes.
Well,
I mean, I had no idea. Did you guys know that? Did you know that your tennis shoes, a dog that sniffs out any kind of accelerant like that could sniff that out of your shoes? I had no clue. I had no idea that was even a thing. Now, mind you, in the beginning, you heard that he did like to start fires. He did. I mean, we're talking about low country kids. And when you come, I don't care if you're a low country kid, yeah, you're going to experiment. And they lived right by a railroad track. And him and his buddies would get down there and they would set stuff on fire, just their boys. They were young teenage boys in a little country town with nothing to do but ride your bike, hang out, go fishing, start little fires. It's just what they did, you know. Yeah, exactly, Lisa. Like every Boy Scout. There you go. It's just a thing. Even as a girl, I remember setting like stuff on fire and using hairspray and just country kids. Just country kids doing country kid things. And it's very sad that this young man's whole life is ruined. Not only the fact that he spent all this time in prison, but that his mother is gone, and they say he did it. Crazy. And for him mentally to be okay today is a blessing in itself. I can't say that I could possibly go through all that and be 100% after that. I can't.
Well, so looking at this case, you were brought in after the fact to look at this science. It sounds like you feel pretty strongly. This science is not science that should have been used to convict Michael Politte.
That's correct.
Even beyond the physical evidence, experts say the investigation was flawed in critical ways. Jim Trainum is a former Washington, D.C. police officer with 27 years of experience, 17 as a homicide detective. He examined the entire case file at the request of Mike's attorneys, and he notes that Sheriff Ron Skiles zeroed in on Mike from the start.
And, there was reason to, as Michael was one of the last people in the house. However, he based his conclusions solely on the way Michael was behaving. And he was projecting how he thought he would behave onto Michael, even though his experience was nothing like Michael was going through. And this is something called false consensus bias. And there's so many cases out there where the wrong person, especially juveniles, have been wrongfully identified as suspects based on this sort of projection.
As Jim acknowledges, Mike was the one family member known to be in the trailer at the time of the attack on Rita Politte. Sheriff's investigators were skeptical that Mike and Josh could have slept through the attack, but Jim Trainum says that's a foolish conclusion.
First off, they kind of assumed that the attack was this long and drawn-out thing. But when you look at the crime scene, it was a blitz. She confronted the person, he attacked her, and she was probably down and out very, very quickly. And so the amount of noise could have been minimal. Second, they don't take into account the boys' sleeping habits. I don't know about your experience, but with my teenage boys, they could sleep through just about anything. Plus, they had been smoking marijuana that night. And there was this big deal about Michael and the radio. He had a radio turned on in his room playing that night. The detectives were saying, well, it was very, very low. But when you look at where the radio was, it was right over top of his head. And standing at the foot of the bed or standing outside the room, it's not going to be that loud. But if you're sleeping right under the speakers, like Michael was, that's totally different.
Longtime homicide detective Jim Trainum adds that based on the bloody evidence from the crime scene, the killer likely would have had blood on his clothes or on his body. Mike didn't. Also, the autopsy found that Rita Politte had been killed with a blunt object before she was set on fire. If Mike was the killer, he would have had to quickly hide the weapon somewhere, even as his friend Josh slept in his bedroom. That object has never been found.
Tammy Belfield, who was the evidence tech, searched Mike's bedroom repeatedly, multiple techs searching it, nothing found that could have been used to make the blunt force trauma that led to Rita Politte's death.
Again, that's Megan Crane, co-director of the Missouri chapter of the MacArthur Justice Center.
But days after that, a family member of Mike Politte came to the police station and reported a relative, Ed Politte, and his wife had been in the trailer, who knows why, and found supposedly a bloody tire iron sticking out of Mike's closet. So the law enforcement reclaimed the scene, went and searched the room again, and this tool was there. The evidence tech said this looks like rust, not blood, for one, and testing later confirmed it was rust, not blood. But the evidence tech who searched the scene said, I'm 100% certain this was not there the day of the crime. Somebody planted this evidence, yet no one followed up on that lead. There's not a single report that mentions it after that fact, and there's not a single indicator that he was interviewed. That's something they knew before Mike ever went to trial.
You heard that right. So, Officer Belfield goes in. She's looked through this whole. It's like a double wide or like a modular home is what it is. It's more like a double wide. So she goes through, and I'm sure she did her job, and she went through everything. She's a very good officer, but she says, that wasn't there. That was not in his room. Wasn't. And whoever put that there, I guess, didn't have enough common sense to think, hey, they're going to figure out this is rust. I mean, really? Come on.
What we have learned since, and what could have been discovered then if there'd been an adequate investigation, is multiple people saw him walking down railroad tracks through the woods away from Rita Politte's trailer, right as the sirens were approaching her house. So very soon after this crime had occurred.
So there's reason that people may have wanted to question this guy, but that never happened.
No.
Many people who've studied this case have questions about Ed's cousin, and those questions lead back to Mike's dad, Ed Politte. Ed has an alibi for the morning of Rita's death. Phone records confirm he answered his phone at a time when he couldn't have been home if he'd set the fire in the trailer. But Mike's attorneys say Ed and his cousin were close, and attorneys say Ed had good reason to want his ex-wife Rita dead.
Mike's father, Ed Politte, was looked at to some extent as a suspect, but he had a loose alibi. And it seems that once he had that, they stopped digging. They stopped looking. As the law enforcement who's come forward in this case because she believes in Mike's innocence, she said he was tossed out of the suspect pool very quickly. And she never really understood why, except for the fact that the lead detectives on this case just had their mind set on Mike from jump.
And Ed Politte, Mike's dad, he had good reason to be very angry at the murder victim here, Mike's mom. There's also some allegations that he made threats. And it doesn't sound like that's something that the police dug into. They just looked to see if he had some sort of alibi, and that was it.
They did not dig into it, that's right. And there are law enforcement on the public record since trial saying they continue to suspect Ed Politte was involved, but no real legwork has been done to do anything about that.
Say what? Did you guys catch that? So they have suspected that this other person, I'm not going to name names, but they have suspected that this other person has been involved in this whole time. But yeah, they didn't want to do the legwork. Oh gosh. How convenient that must be to stand there and put your uniform on and your badge and say, I'm going to serve and protect, but meh, we think maybe somebody else is involved, but who wants to do the legwork, right? Sickening.
And we'll have more on the questions surrounding Mike's father, Ed, after a quick break. And sent to prison as an 18-year-old, but he always insisted on his innocence. Mike didn't really have a motive for wanting to kill his mother, but Mike's lawyers note that Ed, his father, did. Ed and Rita had recently gotten divorced, and the fight over money turned ugly. Witnesses say Ed Politte threatened Rita. When she was awarded half his pension the week before her murder, he allegedly said she'd never see a penny of it. The only way he didn't have to pay? If she remarried or if she died. Ed Politte could prove he was home when Rita was killed, but Mike's lawyers say that doesn't rule out his associates, including Ed's cousin, who was seen not far from the trailer soon after the fire. Neither Ed nor his cousin responded to my letters seeking comment about these allegations. We also attempted to reach them by phone, but none of the phone numbers listed in public databases led to either man. In 2016, Ed Politte was interviewed for an MTV documentary about his son's case. They didn't focus on his involvement, although Mike's sisters did raise their suspicions about him on camera. Ed told the filmmakers about an interaction with law enforcement after Mike's arrest.
In August of '99, I drove down to visit Mike. One of the officers says, we really don't think Mike did this. Well, that didn't sit well with me. And I asked him, I said, what the hell is he doing in jail? Oh, well, we don't have anybody else. I've since become a Christian. I won't repeat what I said. But I did try to provoke him. I wanted him to come to me. I wanted that like nothing else. I called him every name in the book. Come on. And he would have if that other officer wouldn't have been there. And I'd have had my vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord.
Why do you feel like they would say those things to you and just leave it at that?
Because they couldn't prove that I did it. Who's the first suspect? The ex. I was 90 miles away. Phone records prove it. I feel like if I wouldn't have picked up the phone at 7 o'clock in the morning, I would be in prison right now.
You ever wish you didn't answer it?
More times than you know.
That phone call saved your life.
And right it is.
Ed Politte also told the filmmakers he knew Mike didn't do it. He declined to discuss his divorce from Rita Politte. Neither Mike nor his sisters have any relationship with Ed Politte today. Jim Trainum is the homicide detective who examined.
And as we go through here, yes, that was the father. But Rita and Ed had 3 children. They had Crystal, Melanie, and Michael. But to this day, all 3 of them, his own children, have nothing to say to this man. I'm going to just leave it at that.
Examined the evidence on behalf of Mike's attorneys. He says initial investigators did not adequately consider alternative suspects, and that includes the possibility of any associates of Ed Politte.
I don't see anything in there whatsoever. He would have been the most likely suspect or associate of his, simply because he had the motive and he was the one who would benefit from her death. They say that they gave him a voice stress test, but I can't find the results anywhere. And so I find that to be rather curious. And let's be straight about the voice stress test. It's pseudoscience. It really doesn't work. And there are so many detectives who use it as a tool in their investigation, which is really, really improper.
Not to just mention that this just happened, and they gave him a voice stress test. I'm pretty sure when you're 14 years old and you've went through this kind of traumatic incident and you've seen what you've seen, knowing that your mother's gone, all of this, woken up out of a sleep, you're probably going to be a bit stressed. Your voice is probably going to be a little bit stressed. And the fact that they use that against him is absolutely astonishing to me. That's crazy. What? Why? Of course he's got a little stress going on. I mean, wow. Damn, I don't get that. I don't get that logic at all. I just don't.
They rule people in or out. But even so, they had a few other people, I believe it was three, who showed some form of deception, just like they claimed Michael and Josh did. However, they did not pursue them as potential suspects in this case.
The investigators also ignored other evidence that didn't fit their narrative. That included blood on the outside door of the trailer and unidentified footprints just outside the trailer. To Jim Trainum, that suggests someone exited the trailer after killing Rita.
Even though they photographed the footprints, noted the footprints, they didn't note where they were. They didn't take plaster cast. There was this woman, a neighbor, who reported her dogs going crazy at 3 o'clock in the morning at the fence line. And that really was kind of, put aside because it didn't fit in their timeline.
Last month, attorneys for Mike Politte laid out their case in a deeply researched appeal to the Western District of Missouri. The petition they filed was 109 pages, not including the many affidavits attached as additional evidence. The appellate court rejected the appeal just 1 week later. Here's what attorney Megan Crane of the MacArthur Justice Center tells me about that.
We were absolutely disappointed by the Western District's denial, and we question whether they had the time to even read this filing. But we absolutely maintain hope, and we're going to continue fighting for justice for Mike and justice for Rita. And we will be refiling his petition in the Missouri Supreme Court in the very near future. And we're hopeful that, unlike in the Western District, that we actually get a meaningful and close review in the Missouri Supreme Court.
Do you have better odds of that happening at the Missouri Supreme Court? I mean, once the appellate court has just turned this down so summarily, does that make it harder?
The Missouri Supreme Court historically, in wrongful conviction cases, will sometimes appoint a special master, which is an ability they have under a Missouri statute. And so I do think we have a hope, and it is what we are aiming for here, what we're expecting, what we're fighting for, is that they'll appoint a special master who has the time to really dig in and to read our over 100 pages of a petition and the hundreds of pages of exhibits supporting it.
And there is some precedent for this in Missouri, that these special masters have been appointed and that it leads to this sort of evidentiary hearing.
Yes, that's right.
So there's another question here, even beyond the chance of getting that. And I know that's your big goal. But in the meantime, there's also this question of, could Mike get paroled after all these years behind bars? Where does that stand?
The Missouri legislature passed a statute this summer, SB 26, that finally gives him a chance for release. He now is eligible for parole and could go before the parole board for his hearing anytime in the coming months. The SB 26 gives anyone who's convicted under 18 a chance at parole eligibility after serving 15 years. So Mike is one of the over 500 people that will benefit from this statute, and we're expecting to find out the date hearing any day now.
And at a parole hearing, this is not automatic. They will look at his record in prison. They'll look at whether he's been rehabilitated. But this would be his first chance that he's ever gotten to even make the case that he deserves to be released. Do you think he's a good candidate for parole?
He's a stellar candidate for parole, Sarah. The only thing that may work against him, to be honest, is his innocence.
How so?
Parole boards have been known to hold innocence against prisoners because they want to see a showing of remorse, of a showing of accountability. And even in a case like Mike, where there is ample scientific, compelling evidence of innocence, that works against them because where's the remorse? Where's the I'm sorry? But aside from that, we are extremely hopeful that Mike will be released on parole because somehow, despite going into adult prisons as a kid, he has managed to not only survive, he has thrived. And he has made every effort to make his time in prison productive. He often talks about that his guiding mission is to make his mom proud and follow her example. And he absolutely has.
So not to get ahead of ourselves here, but if Mike is able to get that parole and he's released from prison, Does that make all of this a moot point? I mean, he would be out of prison. He has already served this time.
Mhm.
That's not going to change no matter what happens. Will you keep fighting to try to make the case for his innocence?
Great question. We absolutely will.
And he has. He since has been released from prison. He served his 23 years, and like I said, he did the innocence program, Midwest Innocence Program did get him freed from prison, but he's still on lifetime parole. Well, if they prove that he didn't do this, why is he having a lifetime parole officer that he has to ask permission to leave state even for work? This has just gone way beyond rights. This is just, and it's been so long, they fought so hard, and still to this day, he still has a parole officer. I mean, how's that even possible, right? It's crazy, but I have other stuff to show you. I have a little bit more. Oh, that's not it. There we go.
got
The moment I learned when I was going home was exciting. It was the buildup was great because they called me back from work, and I was working in the furniture factory. They told me I need to go to Building 10. I knew what it was. It was a parole officer. And she said, what she said? She said, "Well, I got your date." I said, "It's a date," because I you're always in the back of your mind of a setback, and it's happened. And she was like, "It's a 60-day date." Almost cried. Yeah. Where's my lawyer? Yeah. I love you guys, man. Thank you so much. The adrenaline rush walking through the gate. I passed through the little area where I've always seen it when I was working in maintenance, and it's the walkway that passes through the death fence. And I'm like, man, one day I'm gonna walk through there. And it was finally here, and I took my time. I looked around, and I even told the officer, I never thought I'd be at this point right here, parallel with the death fence, and walking through it. And it was amazing. It was awesome. I ain't seen him since he was 12 years old, and I was 14. We're gonna take a bike ride from the parking lot to the railroad tracks. On a bicycle. I'm leaving here the same way that I came in here. Riding a bicycle. Time feels different. It feels like a chapter's ending. This chapter of incarceration, it's been close to 2/3 of my life is over, and the feeling is it's really indescribable how it feels. Best way I can describe it is going from life to life. The thing I look forward to the most is just hanging out with my family that I've missed for so many years, and never even really been able to hang out with them. So that's the most exciting part. It's going to be great to be able to sit on the back porch with my family, my sisters. That's always been there for me. They're more excited than I am, I think.
It is going to be a wild ride, and we're going to have as much fun as possible. It's really indescribable, the feelings that I'm feeling right now. There's so many emotions going on, good ones, exciting ones. To be back together again after all this time is like all we really ever wanted, and today's the day.
Yeah, they've been with me every step of the way. They've always knew I was innocent, and they knew that one day this day would come. They always told me it would come. They kept me going. And Mom, she's happy. She's happy. So I'm free. I feel young. Yeah, so it's amazing, man.
I don't know about you guys, but that had me teared up a little bit. I mean, you've got a figure here. I mean, especially him saying, that was his best friend. They're riding the bicycles with him. Um, that's the last time they saw one another. And for them, like I said, they were those young country boys that just rode bicycles everywhere, and they rode to the tracks, and they did country kid stuff. And to see that, I mean, it's like this man he was a child going into prison, coming out a grown ass man, and just now being able to enjoy his family, his friends. And I'm sure it was a bittersweet moment, but for him to say that his mom was happy, I mean, that alone just teared me up because, I mean, think about that. Most of us have children, and that's the last thing that I would want if something like that happened to me, that they would do this to my child. And yes, yeah, I know, Chris, that's how I am. I'm like, oh, well, it's if you can't have any kind of emotion with that, there would be a problem because it's so sad and bittersweet. And the sad part here is that he may be out, but he's not really free. He still has to go to a parole officer. And even though they say, yeah, you're innocent, then why is he on parole? But then that's where tomorrow's going to come in. Tomorrow, like I said, there is the juror that when he went to trial, there was one juror that says, this has aided her this whole time. And she just knew that for all these years that it was the wrong decision. And she was kind of the holdout of the group of the jurors. And she went along with it because, some people won't understand that, but I've had jury duty, and I know that if you are the holdout, you're like, they're looking at you. They're getting mad. You've been here all day. I don't know how long it took for them, but when I was the holdout, it was like they were getting angry at me. And I went along. I went along with it, and it wasn't this kind of major high profile case, but I can completely understand why she felt that way. But the older you get, the more it eats at you. And tomorrow I will be interviewing her, and she's going to come on panel, and she's going to talk about how she felt throughout all of these years of him being in prison, and how she's always felt that this was the wrong decision. So she come forward, and they just will not even talk to her. They're not. And I put out a video the day before yesterday where they actually just had their protest and Tuesday. So the video that I put out was their protest of Tuesday, where she's standing there, and I can play that for you guys if you want. But she's standing there with her sign saying, "Hey, Mr. Jones, do you want to chat with me now?" Because all she wants to do is sit down and tell them that she feels that she's made the wrong decision through that, and she expects him to be off of parole. But no one will talk to her. So I will see if let me find that real quick, because she will be on panel with me tomorrow, and talk about a strong woman to know that she had done wrong. She made the wrong decision, but at the same time, she's got the integrity to say, "Hey, I did make the mistake, but I want to fix it." And that takes a lot. So let me see if I can find my video real quick so that you can see her out there protesting, because that was Tuesday. She was still out there Tuesday. So that alone tells, that she's an amazing woman. Absolutely amazing. I don't know what else to say. She's very strong-willed, obviously. But here's this video that I had made, and you'll see her out there. And that is her standing there with the sign that says, "Hey, Mr. Jones, do you want to chat now?"
You ready?
Here we go. There we go.
Imagine who it's already happened to, and it's been discovered through the due diligence of the Midwest Innocence Project that the fact that there is no gasoline on my shoes, that what the lab was detecting was the aromatic solvent used in the manufacturing of tennis shoes. The only physical evidence that the state used to convict me for this crime has been proven false. Justice for my family would look like my release and the reopening of my mother's murder investigation. I just want to hang out with my family. I'm ready. I'm ready to go home. I just want to go forth and show her that she made an impression. And I try to conduct myself in a way that she would be proud of.
23 years ago, Linda Dickerson Bell sent a teenager to prison for life. Michael Politte, then 18, was on trial in Washington County, Missouri, accused of beating his mother to death and then setting her body ablaze. The defense case was minimal, at best. Politte's overworked public defender took just a half day to present his case and failed to poke holes in supposedly scientific evidence that would soon be thoroughly disproved. Dickerson Bell had many questions, but everyone else seemed so certain, and she went along with it. Politte was sent away to prison for life without any chance of parole. This Tuesday, she's hosting a rally outside the Washington County Prosecutor's Office, hoping to force that office to pursue a wrongful conviction case on Politte's behalf, or at least hear her out. "I've done numerous emails to the gentleman," she says of prosecuting attorney John Jones IV. "He has failed to respond to any of them. I have personally visited his office twice. He continues. So I've given him months and months and months to try to do that. He has chosen to ignore me. And so now I feel like standing in front of his office might keep him from doing that. Jones did not respond to an email seeking comment. Complicating Dickerson Bell's efforts is the fact that Politte was released from prison 3 years ago, despite originally being slapped with a sentence that seemed to foreclose the possibility. His lawyers were pursuing an innocence claim when Missouri enacted criminal justice reforms for people who'd been sentenced as juveniles, including Politte, allowing them to make their case before the parole board. Politte was granted parole and his freedom. But that's only true to a point. Unless the court takes action, he will remain on parole for life, subject to quarterly check-ins and required to get his parole officer's permission anytime he leaves the state, something he has to do as a construction foreman. Politte chafes at the rules but says it does beat being in prison. He's out of jail, yeah, but his life is still controlled by the state, which should have never been involved in the first place, Dickerson Bell says. We made a mistake. And, I mean, it's hard to admit when you make a mistake, but when you're dealing with someone's life and the rest of their life, it shouldn't be that hard. Politte's lawyers at the MacArthur Justice Center have continued to seek to prove his innocence, which would allow him to clear his name and be free of parole's restrictions. Their lawsuit outlining the case for his innocence remains pending in federal court. And separately, Jones' predecessor in the prosecutor's office, Josh Hedgecorth, brought a case using the state's then nascent wrongful conviction law, which allows prosecutors to reopen a case when they believe justice has not been served. But Hedgecorth's efforts became caught up in jurisdictional complications. The Missouri Supreme Court found that he didn't have the right to pursue the case even though his office had prosecuted it, because the trial took place in St. Francois County. It had been moved to avoid pre-trial publicity. Perhaps surprisingly, the state legislature moved quickly to address that flaw in the original law, but by that time, Hedgecorth had lost his re-election bid. The man who beat him, Jones, has shown no interest in resuming the wrongful conviction case. Justice delayed is justice denied, she says. Mike has now been 26.5 years without justice, and sure, he's been home 3 years on lifetime parole, but he still doesn't know who killed his mother, and he and his family haven't seen justice for that. The only way to open up an investigation is to overturn my conviction. So to get to the real perpetrator, we have to overturn my conviction. They stole my life. Quite frankly, I feel like the state of Missouri owes me something. They owe me something, and they owe my mother something. By pure coincidence, Dickerson Bell and Politte found themselves at the same social gathering sometime after his release. He recognized her right away, despite the 20 years since his trial.
What a heartbreaking case. I mean, this has just went on for so long. It's ridiculous. I just, it just feels to me like they just completely stole this young man's life. And a lot of people can point fingers at who they want to point fingers to. And then there's a lot to this, a lot. But at the same time, this man who went in as a child and come out a grown man, God only knows what he's went through when he was serving his time. And they still, to this day, the state holds all control of what he does with his life. If you're, if you, they want to say he's innocent, then innocence isn't being on life parole. It's just not. That's not it. But the integrity of this juror to come forward, and like I said, I hope to see you guys tomorrow when she comes up here. I wanted to kind of prepare you guys for what you heard, so you knew the case a little bit better before I just had someone on panel, saying her part. But for her to have that much integrity and honor to come forward and say, "Hey, I made a mistake, and I have felt this whole time," I respect her so much for that. I do. So I really hope to see you guys tomorrow. It will be I'm gonna start it at 1 so I can do a little refresher, but she will join me at 1:30. So I hope to see you guys tomorrow. This is such a heartbreaking case. Justice for Rita and Mike, and honestly, for every one of them, because they've all suffered this traumatic loss. And they do. The state of Missouri owes more to this family than most. Well, I mean, there's nothing that's going to solve this. Nothing. Yeah, it would be 1:30 Central, Paula. But do you guys have any questions? I don't want to end without any questions. Yeah, Nicole, yeah, it is. It's a very interesting case, and, it's just like little small towns where people think this could never happen here. Well, it does. It does. Absolutely. But I guess if there's no questions, I'm gonna go ahead and end this, and then, I hope to see you guys tomorrow as she comes forward and she says her part, because it feels like she just can't be heard, but I'm gonna give her the platform to say whatever she wants. So you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining. I'm so sorry you're late coming in here, but I love having you here for sure. But all right, guys, have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Take care.
Does anyone understand? Does anyone lend a hand? When the silence starts to bite, will you join me in this fight? Can you see them in your dreams? Can you hear their desperate screams? A heartbeat lost in the night. Oh, will you help me be their voice? In the darkness, let's rejoice, 'cause together we can shine a light. We'll raise our hands, we'll raise our hearts. Let's make a stand, let's tear apart the chains that bind, that